Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. Today, I have two UTXO Alliance members here in Matt Quinn from Nervos and James Amon, a previous guest, an independent contributor and former CTO of Topple. Uh, Thank you both for being here today. We've got a lot to talk about, so why don't we dive right in? Matt, you're our guest here today, our main guest here today, because we're interested in learning about Nervos. And I invited James here to actually participate in this conversation because I think we want to have a braking system and an accelerating system. And I'm here on the braking side of things to help kind of bring things back to basics and slow it down so I can catch up. And James is here to kind of push the edge a little bit and maybe ask some of the questions that I'm missing. And we just want to explore Nervos, some of the fundamental concepts, who you are and how you arrived at Nervos, and then UTXO interoperability, kind of this thing at the edge of all of our awarenesses, that we have this great tool set, but how do we get there? That's kind of where we're going in this conversation. So, Matt, I'm going to kick it over to you. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you arrived at Nervos? What was kind of your entryway into crypto, and how you found yourself there?
Sure. So prior to crypto, I was an IT consultant building accounting systems, which were just kind of a mess of Excel sheets and databases, and learned about Bitcoin as a micropayment or possible micropayment solution. Way back in the dinosaur days before the scaling wars. And yeah, Bitcoin to me just looked like a superior solution to the problems that I was seeing day to day in terms of keeping books in sync. And I thought that I was one of those people that thought we were going to have a blockchain, not Bitcoin kind of world, and that didn't really materialize. But along the way, did get really interested in using crypto for micropayments or blockchains for micropayments, and still, I think especially when we talk about UTXOs and payment channels, still kind of pursuing that vision. And yeah, I got pulled into the Ethereum community right before the big bull run in 2017. Started doing some meetups and met one of the earliest employees of the Nervos Foundation, kind of in that circle. And back in those days, like 2018, there were a number of EVM problems that not many people were discussing, say parallelization of transactions, and I guess was never really a huge fan of proof of stake too. And yeah, just jumped on board with Nervos. Just started editing articles and just really getting to know more about the project because it seemed like a solution to a lot of the problems that just weren't even being thought about in the Ethereum world. And yeah, the team's awesome, and it's continued from there. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah, I've in my research, I've watched a lot of the YouTube material and feel like I've gotten some great 101, 201, 301 classes in the blockchain space. And one of them in particular from 4 years ago really just kind of helped me cement a few of the ideas. And so I would highly recommend people checking out Nervos's documentation and education channels because they're great. Before we go into some of the technical concepts, I would kind of consider an ecosystem developer in the Nervos network. Is that how you view yourself? And then what type of people are brought into these spaces? Who have you met as like an archetype of a person?
Sure. So yeah, I would say ecosystem development is my number one priority. Um, in terms of the archetypes, I mean, I think with the bull runs, I think you see all sorts
Mhm.
of people. It runs the expanse of crypto, but I think a lot of those characters kind of come and go. People kind of they come in, they have their things they're trying to do or the things they're interested in. They hang out for a few months. Maybe they build something. Maybe they get a grant. But more often than not, they kind of take their bags and you know go forward. But I think the people who really stick around, and I think what the ecosystem really develops as, are people who have been in crypto for some time, can kind of demystify all of these things. And if you tell them 100,000 transactions per second, they tell you you're making some compromises somewhere. There's somewhere in all of this you're making a compromise, and like they see through it, and they're not they're not excited by those flashy things or the, I guess maybe hand wavingness. They really want to get to the core of what this is and the science of crypto. And I think those people are the ones that stick around. People who like hard problems, I think, especially the cell model, which I know we'll talk about, is presents a ton of opportunity, and I think we're just really just grazing the surface of it. But if something's going to take years to work through the engineering of, and I'll go back to Bitcoin for this, you really need people who believe in whatever that end goal is that you're getting to stick through it. Otherwise, something along the way is just going to distract their attention. And yeah, I think more often than not, our community is made up of people that kind of wish there was something else that drew their attention to it, just because it is such a long road to work this out. And you just really can't unsee some of these things if you just know what we're going to have to do to build a blockchain enabled world that stays decentralized and secure.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of I'm going to draw two things together. So Nervos, I asked you prior to this meeting, Nervos's name comes from kind of the nervous system, or nerve OS. And we're all connecting together from the UTXO Alliance, a consortium of builders and what I would say is a bunch of brilliant people in a room together, trying to with like-minded missions. That's the mission that, kind of, after all the hand waving and all the speculation is gone, who's sitting here in the room still? Mm-hmm. Everyone here is driven by a mission. And so then it is the compromise and trade-offs that kind of put us into slightly different ways that we're approaching things. Mm-hmm. And if we were to build a nervous system, if we were to build kind of this interoperability between the people that exist in the room and the different approaches they come to, we see many different models. So one model, the Nervos model, we're going to start above UTXOs and go straight to the cell model. But where I'm going to kind of ask us to break down a little bit is what did we need to know in order to understand what the cell model is?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So there's probably a lot there. But in terms of kind of just in general, the cell model, it contains arbitrary data, which could, and it basically makes the token a first-class citizen. It is, the cell is where state exists. Mm-hmm. And so what's a good place to begin with from there, Matt, that allows us to kind of understand what the philosophical approach was, and then lets us make the next steps forward? And then James, feel free to pop in here when we want to kind of learn a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
I think starting with Bitcoin and really appreciating what is there with Bitcoin is the best place to start. So if you think about the ledger of Bitcoin, which really is just a number of pieces of digital gold that have, I don't even know if owners is the right term, that have something attached to them that says, if you fulfill this condition, then you can spend these coins. So the state in that system is these amounts and then owners, or not owners, I guess, just code that allows someone to access certain coins. And
I like when we put some material to it. We'll give some leeway with the language, but I hear you. Keep going.
So that amount is just a number, and then the code that allows you to spend it. It could be a public key that you need to present a signature to, or it could be a multi-sig that you need to present two signatures, or some other conditional logic. But over time, that logic gets upgraded. So you could look at, say, SegWit or Taproot. The Bitcoin core developers continue to add new ways to spend that digital gold. And in the Ethereum community, this has started to become talked about as in terms of account abstraction. But with UTXOs, you don't have accounts. So you already have this abstract notion of an account, and you can upgrade it to change what those spending conditions are. And when we start to get into Nervos, it really is just generalizing both of those concepts. So instead of just an amount of uh, Bitcoin in that UTXO, you just have any sort of data that could be whatever you want. I mean, I think a lot of people try to use this for smart contracts. I think people who have been more successful have been. I guess we have a identity kind of solution right now, and to really just utilize all this for storing data and updating it before making it all sorts of crazy smart contract logic kind of stuff. But it'll get there in time. It's just a lot of issues to work through, and so that's generalizing that data storage part. But then you also have generalization of that authorization logic as well. Instead of say the core developers having to add new spending conditions each time with a hard fork, or I guess soft fork they use, we just have a very low level virtual machine that just executes binary code. And it uses the RISC-V instruction set. So you can think of it as, I guess, an emulation of hardware. So anything that your physical machine could do, so it's way below the operating system level, that's the level that you're interacting with on the blockchain. The control that you get over how coins get spent or how state transitions can execute.
The benefit of that is that it gives users the ability to do more arbitrary type things, and like I think one of the examples presented is that there are many cryptographic primitives
Yes.
that allow that different chains allow for use, and with each one there's kind of well, I don't know, you have to build additional logic to handle those. But if you make that arbitrary enough, then any can come in and out. And because it's the RISC-V framework is low enough, it makes it more approachable, or it makes it more generalizable, like you said. So from a user standpoint, you're already starting with something that is highly generalizable, which makes it more composable, programmable. Okay.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's two sides to every coin, right? So one of the challenges that we've seen is that if you were to give someone a laptop with no operating system and then say, build whatever you want, it's capable of doing anything, they're going to have a hard time. You're going to have to build up these layers of abstraction. I think we're in the midst of, figuring out, what are the MVPs to getting there? What are the fastest routes to bootstrapping an ecosystem with that kind of setup? But on the other hand, when we talk about interoperability, one of the first things that was deployed on Nervos was the ability to use an Ethereum wallet to hold your coins. And I look at this as one of those things that is so easy to underappreciate. When I look at like Sui or any of the Move chains, if you go to any of their dApps, the first thing they say is, do you have any one of these unknown browser extensions installed? And we didn't go through that. And there are a lot of people who hold their CKB, the Nervos native coin, with their Ethereum wallets, and they don't think about it. More recently, we've had a team build a native mobile wallet which uses the secure enclave in your phone to generate a private key and store it. And this is different from some of those other I guess solutions that are like this that we use, like a Google authentication and some key share that's encrypted and stored somewhere. There's not kind of these extra layers there. It's just a key that's stored in your actual device, and that's the cryptography that holds those coins. And this is just the start. I mean, this is people playing with the primitives there. And I was saying before that the goal here is just build I guess, maximally generalized system that whatever people want to do in the future they can, but it's again, two sides to every coin. It does take time to build things up in that kind of paradigm.
So one question I had, I was really intrigued by the use of the RISC-V virtual machine. Can I ask what inspired that? Was that
Sure.
like a no brainer? It was just obviously we're going to use something low level, or did it was it a bit of an internal debate? Because
I think we benefit from a few very smart veterans of computer science, just their intuitions. Because I think, I remember seeing a Reddit post almost 5 years ago, and it was like RISC-V first WebAssembly is specifically in response to a meetup that we did. And it said RISC-V will never outperform WebAssembly. You'll have kind of the best you're going to do is parity in performance,
Mhm.
and our retort was that we don't really care. Like that's not our goal. Performance is not our goal.
Yeah.
If you look
You're
at
on
upgrading a blockchain, is like upgrading a piece of hardware. It's hard and
Mhm.
you need to roll it out to everybody. So we have had, I guess, one hard fork. There's another one planned, but those are meant to be things that go away over time. Because if we wanted to add instruction sets to this virtual computer that we have, there's only so many of those that are going to get added. And yeah, I think just in terms of the approach, it was to build something generalized that wasn't going to need these kind of ad hoc updates and be prone to the governance debates. Even you see in Ethereum, they're going to break. I think it's Aragon's contracts will break with the EOF upgrade.
Oh,
And
wow.
we've always approached this very much, I guess, in a Bitcoin kind of mind, that we want something decentralized. We don't want it to be subject to the control of core developers, and you have some factions that point at that and say it's a centralized thing, it's a security, they control the network. We just wanted this network that continued to run.
Yeah.
And
It does feel like backwards compatibility with something that like the Bitcoin community holds so dear is
yes,
like sometimes not even thought about in the like more modern conversations.
yeah, the whole move fast and break things mindset. I think it's where Ethereum started. It's not where Bitcoin started. I mean, kind of. It's like socially, Satoshi was move fast and break things in the government kind of realm, but not in terms of software. And Ethereum started with that mindset, and I think over time has tried to get away from it. This whole notion of like protocol ossification, and Vitalik kind of laying out, after this period of rapid change will lower. But I think that's baked into the culture of the people who are closest to Ethereum and holders of ETH as well. That they want the protocol to evolve. They want to have these prolonged disputes, and eventually somebody exercises the power rights and just does it. Yeah.
So, so Matt, you brought up CKB, the common knowledge base, which is also the token that I think I would love some kind of more understanding of that the CK byte, which
Mhm.
um, I guess if you're thinking of a generalizable that arbitrary data space inside of a cell,
Mhm.
um, then the token economics that emerge out of that are very interesting because it's kind of there's the utility within um, making any of that logic or contracts work or
Yeah.
storage requires the CKB.
Yes.
Um, I find it very interesting. I'm probably not pointing it out in the way that it's thought of, but could you kind of like build us up from within the cell model? Where does CKB sit?
Sure. Yeah. So one CKB equals 1 byte is kind of the meme that makes it clear to everybody. So if you wanted to store data on chain, you have to actually hold the CKB to, I guess, that corresponds to that data. There's a certain number of CKB in circulation, and that is the amount of data that can be stored on the chain. So I think it's maybe 40 billion or 40 gigabytes right now. Yeah, so it's an economic model that's focused on state, which was thought of as the right way to go for a smart contract platform. That the idea of the network running off transaction fees in Bitcoin was kind of one of the earliest criticisms, that the economics of this network change once you have variable rewards. And what I guess our advisors team, the people who designed the token economics saw is that if you base that block reward on the amount of state that's occupied, you're going to always have a steady block reward, and that will keep the network secure. And if there's anything we see with blockchains is that state continues to grow. And I think you can look at all the Nervos like docs and papers. You can see kind of this vision of an ideal world and how the economics of the network function. But I think in these early days we've seen it more as a DOS prevention almost. We haven't had a bunch of 10K PFP projects that take advantage of the um, the fees being low and just deploy a lot of junk on chain, because you'd actually have to own the CKB. And even though the token price is, I think, relatively low, just throughout the history of it, it's still enough to prevent people from just writing a bunch of data to the chain. And so right now there's about 140 megabytes of data stored, which is relatively low, I think, for how chains go. But yeah, I
So
think
that
having that
that leads.
economic function, yeah.
Sorry, good. So is there a trade off between uh, it's disincentivizing the overuse of it, which means
Yes.
if you needed to free up space, maybe uh, what's currently on chain would be like, how does it work if you wanted to free up space? Does what's left over from what was originally done? How is that
Yeah.
tracked?
So uh, I guess similarly to UTXOs, I mean, once spend the UTXO, you can do whatever you want. So you always hold that CKB, unless you give it to somebody else. But it's not like a fee that goes to a miner and you lose something. If I have 1,000 CKB and I'm storing some data, then I can chain. I can spend that UTXO and then I can store different data.
Yeah,
And yeah, I guess one point I missed is the goal here is to keep the full node operation cost down, so we don't have just hundreds of gigabytes of data that full nodes need to store. And yeah, if you run a prune node, then it would only be 140 megabytes of data you have to store to stay in sync in the network, and that's
Wow, that's crazy.
yeah,
Do you guys have any? So one thing I mean, state rent is a really, I love that idea,
yeah,
especially seeing like how gargantuan the try is in
yeah.
Ethereum now. One thing I couldn't tell though, so I saw that when you want to free up space,
Mhm.
uh, but do you guys have any sort like Ergo? Uh, I think they have a proposal where they want to do like a 4 year
Yeah.
like window that like you don't pay anything for 4 years, but after that the miners can start to like basically spin your UTXOs
Mhm.
on your behalf, and they have to put them back where they were, but they get to like deduct from your rent. Is there anything
Yeah.
like that in Nervos?
Yeah, so we have the primary emission, which is similar to Bitcoin. It halves over time, but there's also
Yeah.
a secondary issuance that
Mm.
enforces this tax on people storing data with using their CKB. So say if I have,
Okay.
well, let me think of a good way to explain this. But basically, what happens is, say I have 1,000 bytes of data I'm storing. I'm using that CKB. The portion of that secondary issuance for that 1,000 bytes is going to go to miners. So it's like the state rent is paid every block through. It's an opportunity cost enforced on the holders of that CKB, because they could say, if I hold those 1,000 CKB, there's a Nervos DAO that I can lock them in and I'll get that portion of issuance then. But if I don't do that, then it'll go to the miners.
Interesting. It's really cool. I like that. It's a good state bloat.
It's the magic of UTXOs too. I mean, you can't do this with accounts because all of your state is combined. But with UTXOs, you have separate state for all the users. So
so what does that point towards in terms of incentivizing the use cases? Does it point towards anything kind of specifically, or is it's built for any type of use case? What are you seeing from that standpoint?
it is built for any kind of use case. I think use cases that are more about verified data and just needing to have I guess knowledge of shared data are better than computation based stuff right now. I mean, we may find in time that UTXOs and RISC-V, it's a better fit for smart contracts, computation kind of stuff. I think that was kind of where the idea started from, but I think we're finding that that's a really long road. So anybody who looks at where things are today and assesses them is going to say, like, why don't you just use Ethereum? Um, we have seen that building a layer 2 network here, that there may be some advantages, which I think get into another long conversation I'd have to prepare for. But there is a different layer of abstraction when you have UTXOs under there. As far as where things get pushed to, efficiency really is the underpinning that I've seen. So, that thing I was saying about not having 10K PFPs, like we don't have that, but we do have a team that's built a construction to store NFTs in a sparse Merkle tree. So you only have 32 bytes on chain, and then you have all of the data that went into creating that tree in the witness data and the history of the chain that people can pull out and use if they wanted to. But the actual data that's stored on chain is relatively small. And yeah, I guess it's similar things over time. People will be incentivized to use more compact protocols because they have to have the space on chain.
So what is this? What would you prefer, or what would you like kind of members of the UTXO Alliance to know a bit more about, so that it reveals kind of the next set of conversations that have to happen within our own alliance?
Yeah.
It's what's kind of, where do you sit close to another member in the UTXO Alliance, and what conversation needs to happen there to kind of uh, make a catalyst for a next step in a conversation in a multi-chain way?
That's a great question. I think we're a great place to experiment. There's no conversation around like, well, if I only had this primitive, or if you guys could only do this, then we could try this out. And I think a lot of these things, when we talk about cross-chain interoperability and multi-chain stuff in relation to UTXOs, we're still talking about concepts. We haven't seen the problems that reveal themselves in practice and the things that users will run into. And I think just for any member of the UTXO Alliance that has some sort of mature ideas around doing things cross-chain, I think Hydra is a great place to start here. We're a great place to just get your hands dirty and try it out and see what this looks like in practice. And it's completely open-ended in terms of your what's at your disposal. And yeah, I think there may be other chains that have other value, but for us, it's completely around that open-endedness as far as cryptography goes and your programming model.
Yeah, I was really impressed by like the level of documentation. I'll admit I had never really like delved into the Nervos ecosystem before, but prepping for this, I'm pretty excited to like go give it a try. It
That's
seems
awesome.
it I don't know to realize a lot of the ideas that I think I came upon on my own, just studying Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then I saw them in the Nervos docs, right? Like I literally called our boxes like, oh, they're protected by lock scripts. And then I read, I was like, oh, lock scripts and TypeScripts. Oh man, TypeScripts are a pretty good idea.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
so yeah, it's a really
that's
cool
awesome.
ecosystem.
I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, I
Oh
think
yeah,
piggybacking on my previous thing about like who sticks around. It's the people who understand these things because like I um, we have the team that's building payment channels now. So it's the Polycrypt team. They've done Perun in the Ethereum ecosystem, and
nice.
yeah, they had nothing but great things to say about building on CKB. But then if you talk to some other builders that maybe are coming from the Ethereum ecosystem, and they're like, well, where are the docs? I want to, I guess they're looking for something. If you're a front end web dev, how do I just create an application? And it's like it's not quite there yet for that. We do have an EVM compatible L2, which is great for that. But yeah, from the core L1 concepts, it really does seem like people have to appreciate the guts of this thing to really like that's who it's for at this point. And I like comparing the trajectory of Bitcoin of like the people who are buying Bitcoin in say 2013 were not the people buying it in 2017, and
Mhm.
it was a different time. And I think from my end, there's a lot of work to be done to accurately communicate that so that we are attracting the people who have something actionable at this time, and not just the people who are coming in expecting it to be already made and just deploy today. More people who can see that there are legs here, and that there's a lot of possibility, and somebody just needs to experiment. I guess that'd be the word.
So James, yeah, from your perspective in kind of doing some of your own research, what was a few things what's something that stood out to you, and then uh, what's something that you were kind of like still curious about or needed more information on? I mean, we could use you as a good use case here. Um, just kind of curious to know your thoughts and what direction like your brain went.
Um, yeah, I think the first thing that like was kind of exciting was um, to see a bit of the frameworks that you guys have been doing. Like I had stumbled upon CKB.js, um, but it what was a little confusing to me was like it seems like there's also Quai or KUAI.
Yeah,
I'm not,
yeah.
yeah, so I wasn't quite
Anyone
sure like what
working
was the more
on
like
these
up
things
to
will
date.
tell you. I don't know why this person uses this person uses that.
Yeah,
We've tried, yeah, but
It's the
there are a
beauty
few
of
different
open.
SDKs that do the same thing or different things and different flavors, and
yeah.
yeah,
So what about? I mean, because then one of the things that I saw with like CKB.js when I was first reading about it was it seemed like you guys had separated out the security part. Like you were like, oh, it's like securing your private keys is a whole nother thing in and of
hmm
itself. We're gonna focus on the utility parts of it for a second.
yes,
So, but it seems like you guys have adopted like mnemonics and
hmm
HD wallets. Um, do you do you encourage that for like forward security, like in Bitcoin, where you should only use the keys once, and like what is the because that's very different than Ethereum, right? In Ethereum, you
yeah.
have one public key and you just use it over and over again. Have you found that to be like an issue that you're having to? Because I always see that. I'm sorry, I'm going all over the place, but like
Yeah,
as part of the
that's right.
frameworks, like pulling in
Yeah,
that how to use keys is like a really
yeah,
fundamental part, and then like how to track the state for users is like really tough in that multi-key environment,
yeah.
and like something I've been struggling with like learning how to do and propose like a
Yeah.
scheme for. So yeah, I'm just
I
curious like what your user
Yeah,
experience is
we
there.
got into it a little bit. I guess first you mentioned kind of the separation of concerns,
Yeah.
with the SDK. I do remember some conversations around that, and it was the idea is that handling key material is a very serious thing. So somebody who is implementing this on behalf of users should know enough to be able to implement it themselves. We shouldn't just make a decision to make it easy for them. They should be able to do that. As far as the, I guess one key one use thing, we do use that as a default, say in the reference client. Doing smart contract stuff with that does get complicated. There was some discussion, a long time ago about that, but since then we did spend some time just pushing all that smart contract stuff up to layer two and just doing
Mhm.
it inside an EVM, and then kind of avoiding that completely. I do think over the long term, it's going to be a consideration. We have a light client now, which will filter through all of the, I guess, derived keys through the chain, and you can pull in all that state. I think maybe we get to a point in time where it's okay for an application developer, and this stuff
Mhm.
makes sense. But I do think in the middle, there's a lot of hard work on making those things nice and working out the logic of how these things work. I don't think we've seen yet that UTXOs are a great fit for the kind of things that people are used to Ethereum doing. I think we're still, the jury's still out on that. I think we've seen some things that are promising, some things that are big questions. But I mean, I think DeFi and NFTs are really the two things that have stuck. And I think if we're talking about DeFi, it's a deep thing that we don't know if having UTXOs and splitting up state is going to be the way to go. But NFTs are inherently separated state. Each NFT should be its own state. So you know. NFTs and UTXOs are a great fit, and then DeFi is, it might work great someday. We just got to keep working through the issues.
I've always of the opinion that like yeah, I think from a computational standpoint, like the actual execution of the logic, it's much more difficult, but the security aspect of the UTXO model, right? Like not if one contract is you'd have to go do everyone's you have to go
Mm-hmm.
take everyone's UTXO if you want to try to exploit it. That's always seemed like a much safer realm for me, in my opinion. But you're
Yeah,
right. It is and that's why I guess I was going with the idea of like frameworks is that's why it's so exciting. Is I do see like UTXOs I think make interoperability amongst chains easier just because it kind
mm-hmm.
of unwraps and shows you the internals.
Yeah,
But that user experience part, I think you're right. We have to like kind of offload and build out whole new paradigms for like trying to actually meld the convenience that users want and map them back to UTXOs. And that's not a easy problem by any means.
No, go ahead, Steph.
Do,
I
do,
don't want to take the conversation away.
do you guys think that you know, if one chain, one UTXO based chain solves that, then it flows down pretty easily to other chains that could, in terms of adoption? Or what's kind of like, I'm wondering if one chain is off and running and solves what that problem that you're kind of discussing, how difficult or simple would it be to just kind of backfill the solution into a UTXO aligned set of chains? Would it be clear to you if you saw that was the solution and we need to implement it if it came from anywhere else in the ecosystem?
I would say it would depend on what you were leveraging. If it was something just strictly built in, you have this cryptographic primitive, there's this thing that this person signs, this other person signs this other thing, some sort of magic happens as a result, sure. But if it's like, say, Bitcoin Cash, for example, they have this transaction introspection. They've done something like added 40 opcodes to Bitcoin. And if it's something like that where it is requiring a lot of protocol specific stuff that somebody's leveraging to pull it off, then it's a lot harder to actually do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. If it's more of like a process type thing, I think, yeah. But if it's more like architecture, protocol related, that's where I think you'll hit kind of you're getting at the guts of like why people adopt certain protocols.
Yeah, I've been watching the Bitcoin ordinals kind of stuff pretty closely because it seems like people are starting to play with this idea of how do you do DeFi within this witness data and partially signed transactions kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, when you have a lot of eyes on something, people could uncover a solution. And yeah, haven't seen anything so far that's been convincing, but I know people are playing in interesting realms of trying to do, say, Uniswap stuff in that kind of paradigm. And yeah, I think, I don't know, I'm optimistic. I think I've been quite surprised by what people can accomplish with these low level primitives. And yeah, just continue watching.
Let me ask you both in yes or no format. And Matt, we'll start with you. 100 years from now, do blockchains still exist? Yes or no?
I want to say yes, but I'm reminded of something that someone who did their PhD in quantum cryptography or quantum mechanics told me that we won't need blockchains when we have a quantum computing focused world because the time is not real. So we don't need we don't need a network that stays in sync each block because there's no such thing as the progression of time to begin with. So I think, barring that computers live in this realm that is the universe as it actually is, not as we see it. Yes, blockchains will exist in 100 years.
That was brilliant. Thank you for using more than one word. Just a follow up question. In 100 years from now, when that, not 100 years from now, in 10 years from now, multi-chain, my opinion is, I'm not going to share my opinion. Multi-chain, yes or no? Is the world multi-chain or no?
James, I'll let you go first.
Yeah. No, in the
why?
sense that like TCP/IP, right? That eventually we're gonna settle down to a way of like this is just how it's done, and I do think that in 100 years we'll have blockchains. I just am of the opinion that that time ordered event data, right? That introspection, that ability to like go back and see like who made what decision and when did they make it. I think that will be something that people won't want to give up. But I don't think multi-chain as we know it now will, in this like proliferation of protocols, right, will continue to be a thing. I do think we'll probably resolve down to some set of, this is just the way we do it. It's the way everyone else does it. That was more than one word.
I think it's funny
it.
that I answered the question differently in a one-word answer, but the end that James got to is also what I agree would happen. So I think, like, yes, multi-chain, because TCP/IP is not stateful, right? Like it's just a messaging standard, which I do think is where we arrive at. That there is this universal messaging standard that has a appropriate level of complexity for heterogeneity under it. But because these things are stateful, I mean, I think you're going to have a bunch of them just because you have different levels of state that people care about, and even to scale. And it's like, do you consider Ethereum to be multi-chain if there's optimism and Arbitrum built on top of it? Like, is that multi-chain, or is it just one chain?
I am wondering that. I am wondering what that's considered. I would say if my use case is fulfilled through this,
the stack.
What I anchor to eventually, is it one or many? Do I care about more than one? And my thought process is that I probably will anchor to one, but that's just my intuition because of kind of like the way that the internet has evolved. But I could see where we're in a moment of such explosive growth, which is hard to see when you're here building it and you're kind of narrowly focused, and maybe some things aren't moving as fast as you want, but in the grand bigger scheme of things are moving very fast. And because they're moving so fast, the many chains can ossify as we like expand outwards, and not everything will still exist, but it's kind of like in the Big Bang, like all of this energy exploded outwards from a single point, and as things cooled, we have a bajillion galaxies and bajillion stars. It kind of feels like that in the blockchain space. Like some things are going to be useful for experimentation at the beginning that people definitely continue to use, and that's how they learned it. And then some are for strict value storage, and some are for the actual like day-to-day life. So I guess, in my opinion, what I anchor to, my intuition was not multi-chain, but I could see where the door just gets blasted open, and because we're moving so fast, you have a little bit of this, you have a little bit of that, and that's a ramble, but that's kind of my thoughts are.
There are many chains, but the connections between them is not necessarily the thing that, like, what people.
Yeah.
I like the Big Bang analogy because it really does speak to how each of these things actually is pretty far apart, even though we have mechanisms like bridges that maybe are not going to be around forever that connect them now. Overall, each one is responsible for developing life on its own planet because the connections between them are not that strong.
Thanks for finishing
even like,
my analogy.
Like Cosmos as like a galaxy, it's like that is tightly connected, but it's still its own thing.
Yeah. So let's kind of go back to my original understandings of Nervos from Jan Shea, I think was his name, one of the co-founders. But I loved kind of the progression of how he shared in one of the lectures, that basically, like, in the trilemma, in the scalability, security, and decentralization, no one attempts to trade off security. It's kind of
that's the only one.
And so in scalability and decentralization, the question was asked: how do you maximize the effect of trust by blockchains? And I loved that question because it got to the essence of it, not the appearance of it. What is the effect of trust created? And I think in a lot of ways, we don't need this. We need the spectrum of trust. And then what is the design space to best establish that spectrum so that our use cases can be fulfilled?
Yep.
So, and then you mentioned layer two, which is what Zhang She said. You basically want to hold there's another key on language, hold misbehavior accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And so push normal and kind of daily operations to layer two for scale. But when things go bad, send the proofs back to layer one to judge.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak about just that process or anything interesting that you take away from that? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, so I think first we want to talk about, they say that layer one, like trust, like what are you creating there? How are you getting it? And from our point of view, proof of work is the most robust consensus mechanism. There's not kind of like an open set of questions that are going to need a decade to really suss out what we're looking at here. So proof of work is where we start with that. And verifiability then is the next step, which is also a proof of work thing, that someone can say, download the last 15 years of Bitcoin's history and be confident that that is the history, and they can check it for themselves. And we want to provide the same thing for smart contract systems, that that layer one, that data, that is what everyone needs to know. Everyone can verify it on regular consumer hardware. They don't need some super fast rig or laptop that they leave on all the time to verify it. They can just sync from time to time and download the history. Now, for say holding fraud accountable, Lightning is, I think, the simplest example of, if you have a counterparty that tries to submit a false claim to funds in a channel, then someone can submit a newer claim that delivers the funds to them instead. And optimistic rollups, a similar thing. You can have so if a sequencer submits a bad transaction, someone can challenge it. The chain will enforce it. So that's fraud. You also can do things like ZK rollups, where the chain is just checking a proof, and then everyone sees the proof. Everyone knows what the history is. And I don't think we know what the more complicated mechanisms are yet. That's just where we're starting.
James, you have anything there?
No, I think it was really good. I think that you said it really well. You actually I was going to mention something about the spectrum of trust, particularly with Force Bridge, because I know that's something that you guys are working on at the moment. And how do you see, like, because right now Force Bridge is just a multi-sig.
That's correct.
But yeah, like, are you guys in development of anything to improve the trustless setup, or to actually do something more like Lightning, and then resolve down to and have like fraud proofs to some other external system?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, two efforts in this domain. So you mentioned Force Bridge. There's Force Relay, which is the next version of Force Bridge that's in, I think, Cool. It's still kind of an R&D phase, but that would be similar to IBC. It'd be a header relay bridge where you'd be checking the signatures of a proof of work or a proof of stake chain. Nice. You could probably do something, something like Bitcoin. You could do this with proof of work as well, where you're relaying headers.
Yeah, nice.
Then you mentioned Lightning. Yeah, on the payment channel side, we have the Polycrypt team that's working on payment channels, and they've done cross-chain stuff on other chains, I believe. And I don't want to get ahead of what they're looking at, but fingers crossed they can bring that kind of solution to CKB, and we can be moving funds across chains through payment channels. Like in my personal opinion, I think, partially just because it's unexplored, but I think that is an avenue for more secure cross-chain things. Just moving things in payment channels, and sure, you have liquidity concerns, but there's a lot of liquidity in the world. It's just not in blockchains, and I'm I'm hopeful that we can get there.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's really interesting to hear. Do you guys use? I'm sorry, Liz, a little bit. I guess a little
Yeah,
bit
go
more
for
on
it.
interoperability. But do you guys use like NepoPals or anything like this?
So we'll have Fly Client soon. So it's on testnet now. You're familiar? I guess I can explain Fly Client for everyone since it came up.
Sure.
So Fly Client builds I guess a cryptographic construction, like a big Merkle tree of all the block headers in each block header, and then someone can ask for random block headers out of that, and then um, they get confidence in that a block or that a transaction has been included in the chain just by checking sublinear amount of proof of work. And I think NEPA pals get talked about a lot in cross chain stuff, so I don't think we're there yet. I think you still need to check the proof of work of CKB, which I think is pretty heavy for just say to implement on Ethereum today. I think if you had a precompile, that'd be easy. But I think to just do it in Solidity, it may be a little impractical, even with the NEPA PAL kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, the NEPA PALs themselves, I guess the traditional flavor of NEPA PAL, I haven't quite seen how it's beneficial over Fly Client. That would maybe just require more research, but yeah, I'd be interested to learn more.
No, flight client's a cool idea. Like. Yeah, I guess as long as you can satisfy data availability, that's the only thing that ever um, has come to mind to me as like being an issue. But I feel like data availability is always going to be a problem, no matter
Yeah.
like, especially in cross chain. Like you're just, yeah, it's never gonna. I was reminded because one of the other great things about UTXOs is we don't really suffer the same type of MEV
Mhm.
as an Ethereum. But I was reminded by somebody who's like, MEV always exists because information like can't be propagated instantaneously. And I thought that was a really useful insight to like keep in mind that yeah, information asymmetry will always exist. Data availability is always going to be an issue.
Where I just had my thought fade. Oh, I recently had a conversation with someone named Matthew Pierkowski, and I was asking him about uh, kind of the philosophy of proof of work versus proof of stake, and tying back the kind of fundamental workings of a system back to proof of work, which him and I both agree on as this energy substrate, which ties into the real world, kind of the real world,
Yeah.
and versus proof of stake, which is more like logic and I don't know how to make the case necessarily about why proof of stake has difficulty where proof of work doesn't. But perhaps, James, you could defend proof of stake briefly. Yeah, proof of stake briefly, and then Matt, I would be interested to know just a little bit more about like philosophically why proof of work.
Sure.
Uh, So, James,
Um,
can you do me that favor a little bit?
sure. So I will say I agree a lot with proof of work. Proof of work is a way more elegant solution, and it is way more permissionless. Right? I actually really like proof of work as like a consensus mechanism, and I think the use in Bitcoin is beautiful. Um, I think there is a finite amount of energy in the world, and not every layer one can be proof of work. So I think proof of stake is just a easier way to bootstrap and like get chains started, especially if we're gonna go to like layer twos where you're willing to put your trust in someone anyway and like go through the registration process. Um, and so I don't know. I just always thought that proof of stake was a more energy friendly, sustainable way to like bootstrap new projects and not have to worry about being attacked or creating your own consensus or a hash algorithm like Nervos did. Um, so yeah, that's I think the short of proof of stake.
That's helpful. Matt,
Yeah,
where do you
I'll say
land on that?
that I think proof of stake definitely facilitates innovation in a way that wasn't there before. if you look at I don't know, Litecoin, Zcash, those are examples of chains that needed to build a mining ecosystem, needed to be secure. And yeah, it's definitely been a huge amount of work from our end to build up a mining ecosystem and champion that, because people are putting real expenditure into things. And yeah, I agree with well, James makes a valid point that there is a finite amount of energy in the world, and the idea of scaling proof of work, scaling the trusts created by proof of work horizontally doesn't make a lot of sense, just because of this. But scaling it vertically does, and I think that there's a project called Babylon, in the, I guess that they're a Cosmos project, and they're securing proof of stake chains with Bitcoin, like doing merge mining. There's this concept called the arrow of time, I think, in some proof of stake papers, and the idea is that you, similar to if you write anything to Bitcoin, you know that a certain piece of data existed at a moment in time, and using that to mitigate some of these criticisms of proof of stake, that you could at any point in time rewrite the history if you had access to the keys at different times, and you actually have a like this weight put behind a history, and someone can download the headers of Bitcoin and check that this information existed at a moment in time. And I think proof of work can offer that to proof of stake chains, and I think that's been kind of the one of the talking points that we've had, and we have this Axon framework now, which is being built with this idea that you could have a lot of proof of stake chains that have this, I guess, permanent set in time through through writing some sort of anchor to a proof of work network. And yeah, I think James did a great job of talking about the value of proof of work. I think that the one argument I try to make to everyone, because I don't think it's really up for debate, is that proof of work is objective, and anyone can check the history of Bitcoin and check it for themselves, and anyone can understand it. And I really think that property is hard to refute. I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways that we do need to discuss the pros and cons of these things, but I think at least starting from that distinction between the two is the best way to go.
Well said.
Love it. All right. I'd like to start to wrap up. But before I do that, James, let me just ask, have we skipped anything that would help us set a foundation for another set of conversations, kind of UTXO interoperability wise, that we think we should just pose to Matt right now, if we haven't already?
Okay, well, this is my adversarial mindset coming out a little bit. So it's more of so we talked a bit about the benefits of UTXO interoperability and stuff, and I think we talked a little bit about the challenges with them. But have there been anything with because you guys also have native assets, right? Yeah. With you can issue assets. So have you what has been the reception there? Have you seen a lot of assets issued on chain, or has it just been too cumbersome to issue contracts? I guess, what are some of the neutral and or challenges that you faced with using UTXOs?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't think we've landed on how to do that well yet. I see. Yeah, I mean, I see just people are expecting to be able to, run, and we're, figuring out how to crawl in this respect. If you think about, someone coming from the Ethereum world, where it's I can issue an NFT, I can fractionalize shares against that NFT, I can then put them in a liquidity pool and then generate these LP shares, then I can take those and I can borrow against them somewhere else. It's that is what people are expecting to do. And yeah, I mean, sure, you can tell someone that they actually own the assets and only their key can move those assets, but 90-something% of the time, that's not what people are coming in trying to do. Yeah, I'll add that also the concept of lock scripts and that being generalized or flexible also presents issues here, because something say USDC, they want to implement conditions that allow them to yank those assets from people or to blacklist them, and you if someone controls that asset, you need to modify, you need to have conditions in the script that allow someone to take that. And that means that if wallets want to support those assets, they need to implement those scripts. And wallets are just not set up for that. They're like, all right, we'll do the integration once, that's it. And we're not used to a world where there is complexity in actually having access to these assets, because we're just so used to it being a part of the way the platform itself operates and having this ability to control that in the contract. So as far as first class assets go, I go back to NFTs again. I think people are going to work out the things that are exciting in this paradigm with NFTs, because it's such a better fit than fungible assets.
Yeah, I see one of the challenges. Like, I don't know, I like security and all this stuff, but one of the things you hear about Ethereum is people love the composability of being able to have contracts call contracts, and that's a hard thing to do with UTXOs, right? Like,
It's.
um,
I mean, people. The thing that's encouraging is people continue to fight this fight of making that paradigm more secure, even though it seems like if you were to look at it conceptually, you would say you could never make this secure. And then UTXO is the flip side of things. Of you could look at it and say you're never going to be able to make this composable, and people may still fight that fight anyway. And I think we may be able to accomplish a lot through that.
I think it's good to come at it from both fronts, and yeah, exactly.
All right, I love that, and I am optimistic because just in the sense of with the foundation that Bitcoin lays and the use of UTXO, and I just I have this intuitive feeling that they're in an open source environment with this much attention and the total kind of space that blockchains could exist in the world in 100 years from now. I think all of these problems naively get solved because it's just such a large space with so much potential of beyond money, property rights, trust. There's just too much at stake for each one of these things to not get more attention with enough kind of economic value behind them. I might be on the kind of the very bull end philosophically of what I think this space inhabits, but I think each person is going to have their own blockchain, and I want to record my own truth to it. And I think that I want to represent my own value in a token, and that you won't need to know how to interoperate between my token and your own. It will happen automatically and fade into the background. And so I see a world where this goes to hyper in a way that's not hyper tech. We lose human connection in a way that is human connection is
Facilitated.
Facilitated and reminded that is the thing that we're fighting for here. And so I think it seeps into kind of a lot of different things. But to that extent,
Stephen, ever the optimist.
I'm an optimist. To that extent, we have work to do, because a lot of these words that came up in our conversation today, beyond UTXO, MEV, account, lock script, lightning, ZK, 10K, PFP, optimistic, force bridge, IBC, data availability, multi-event DAG, multi-sig, virtual machine, layer 2, token state, NEPA-POW. These things need, for people like myself running up the ladder to catch up to people like yourselves, need help understanding what the heck is going on here. So I'm really appreciative of both of your times today in having this conversation. I think we need to have a lot more, and if not just to kind of level the playing field and put it out there so that others can kind of pick up on what we're talking about, see what kind of things we're bumping into as problems, and we'll just keep doing it and keep running it forward. Matt, any last words there from you?
No, I think you summed it up well. Yeah, I felt like for some time that this was going to be a really long road, and it's easy to underestimate what that means. And it really is what we're looking at. I always find value in looking back and like computing history and just seeing the way things were, say in the 80s,
Mm,
90s, and really gaining an appreciation for how far things can have to go before they get to a point where everything just works and makes sense. And even then, we still have plenty of work to do to make computers, work better for grandmas. So yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, be in it for the long term. Otherwise, there's lots of things people can do with their time. So.
Well said. James, am I
That's
losing
it. I
connection here?
appreciate you having the conversation, man. It was very good.
Yeah, it's been
Great.
great. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. Yeah, the work that you're doing to educate people about this stuff because it's yeah, there's layers of the onion. It's very very complex, and yeah, always happy to join you guys for any of these. So it's been great.
Matt, James, thank you so much for spending your time here with me today. I look forward to having more conversations in the future. Thanks again.
Thanks, Steph.
Thank you, Seth.